Before our speakers begin, I'd like to note a few logistics. All attendees are currently in listen-only mode. Following our speakers' remarks, we'll open the webinar up to questions. Throughout the presentations, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box, and we'll work to address those during the Q&A period. And as a final note, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll send a link to registrants after the webinar along with the presentation slides. I'm going to hand it over to Maggie Molina, the Senior Director for Policy at ACEEE.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Maggie Molina. I'm Senior Director for Policy here at ACEEE, and ACEEE is pleased to release and present our second edition of the Utility Energy Efficiency Scorecard today. In this comprehensive report, we assess the 52 largest U.S. electric utilities on their energy efficiency programs and performance. Now, this year's scorecard comes at a time of rapid transformation in the utility sector, as more clean energy comes onto the system and as more states are stepping up to address climate change through bold new policies. And now more than ever, utilities will need to prioritize energy efficiency as a low-cost, clean, and must-run resource to meet clean energy goals cost-effectively, while also providing their customers with tools that help them manage their energy use and reduce their energy bills. Utilities have an important leadership role in driving investments in energy efficiency as a resource. Many utilities are rising to this challenge, while others are just getting started and ramping up, and still others stand far behind. Now is a critical time for utilities to benchmark their efficiency performance to their peers and to identify new strategies to test out. And our scorecard serves as a helpful tool for utilities to do so. A couple of top-line findings, and then I'll turn it over to today's speakers and introduce our speakers. This year's report finds that from 2015 to 2018, utilities dramatically increased their annual energy savings, improving by 20%, and they saved almost 20 terawatt hours of electricity in 2018 alone, enough to power 1.8 million homes. Utilities are also increasing efficiency investments in low-income communities and speeding the adoption of electric vehicles. So for the agenda for today's webinar, you'll hear in more detail about the report's overall findings, some trends since the last edition, and then reactions to regional perspectives from those stakeholders. And we'll finish with a moderated Q&A. So now I would like to introduce our panelists today. We are joined by Grace Relf, ACEEE Senior Research Analyst and lead author of the scorecard, Greg Wickler, Executive Director of the California Energy and Demand Management Council, Stacey Paradis, Executive Director of the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, and Samantha Caputo, Senior Policy and Research Analyst from the Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnership. So next, I would like to turn it over to Grace to provide in-depth results of this year's scorecard. Grace conducts research and analysis on utility sector energy efficiency, and she joined ACEEE in 2016. Prior to that, she worked at Carbone as an energy and environmental markets analyst and broker focusing on carbon emissions and biofuels credit markets. She earned an MPA in environmental science and policy from Columbia University in 2015. With that, I will turn it over to Grace.
Thanks, Maggie, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm very excited to see the interest in the report and am excited to be presenting its findings today. I'm Grace Relf. I lead the development of the scorecard, but of course I have to thank a full team of authors and others who supported the development and the release of this report. So with the second edition of the report, we really hope to increase utility sector energy efficiency. In order to do so, we see the scorecard as a benchmarking tool that recognizes leaders, hopefully motivates laggards, and that provides a robust and comparative data set to regulators, policymakers, and stakeholders for their work. We also want to model best practices for utility efficiency portfolios. For this reason, the report this time around now includes a section on the practices of leading energy-saving utilities. Finally, we want to support the broader community in engaging with their utilities on energy efficiency. For example, we hope that the report's data could enable third-party vendors or other researchers to target their efforts at utilities with particular programs. The report includes 20 metrics. All of them are shown here, except for 2 that are unscored. So they are broken into 3 main categories. Category 1 evaluates quantitative achievements. Category 2 evaluates the comprehensiveness of each utility's portfolio of programs. And Category 3 evaluates mechanisms and technologies that enable high efficiency achievements. In this edition, we added 4 new metrics, 2 that are scored and 2 that are unscored. The 2 that are scored include the level of participation, so evaluating what percentage of their customers' utilities are reaching, and the second being the inclusion of energy efficiency in long-term resource planning. We also include information on overall cost effectiveness of each utility's portfolio and on the existence of residential demand charges. Those metrics are currently informational rather than scored. All right, so here are the results. This map shows all 52 utilities that we evaluated, with the top 10 in light blue and the top 11 through 20 in a darker blue. This group of utilities covers just over half of the total electric retail sales in the U.S., so it is quite a large group, and they're located in 31 different states. In this edition, we only added 1 new utility, that's Tampa Electric in Florida. In the end, we had 2 utilities tie for the top spot. Those utilities were Eversource, Massachusetts, and National Grid, Massachusetts, both which earned 92% of the available points. These 2 utilities were also our top finishers in the previous edition. The top 10 finishers come from 7 different states, and 8 of the utilities and these utilities are all in states that finished in the top 13 in ACEEE's most recent state scorecard. So this really highlights the importance of state and regulatory support for efficiency. The bottom 10 utilities come largely from the Southeast, where programs are really just beginning to develop and where state and regulatory support for efficiency is a bit weaker. We are excited that we have 2 most improved utilities in this edition. Consumers Energy and the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power were both our most improved utilities this year. Interestingly, these utilities are both in areas with really ambitious climate goals. The Los Angeles Green New Deal set a 2045 greenhouse gas neutrality target, and they include aggressive building and transportation efficiency metrics. The plan actually touts the benefits of LADWP's energy efficiency programs that they're delivering to customers. Consumers Energy is also committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions 90% by 2040, and it includes energy efficiency as a key component in its future resource plans. Consumers Energy more than doubled its energy savings from the previous edition, and LADWP also increased its savings by over half and offered a whole slew of new emerging programs and technologies. So as Maggie mentioned, we're very excited to see that the overall savings trend is going up. So in addition to consumers and LADWP, savings across the group of utilities increased significantly since the last edition of the report. Annual energy savings increased by 20%, and peak demand savings from energy efficiency increased by 14%. This progress really comes with a large increase in program offerings. We saw utilities offer about 300 more programs than in 2015 for a total of over 900 programs. In particular, we're very excited to see an increased focus on low-income communities. We saw investment in low-income programs increase by more than 30%, and this led to a savings increase of 60% per customer. Some utilities are spending up to 40% of their overall efficiency funding to help low-income customers save money and energy, which is very exciting. So within that large increase in program offerings, we're seeing that utilities are pursuing innovative approaches to delivering efficiency. For example, 32 out of the 52 utilities ran pilot programs in 2018. Common pilots are focused on emerging technologies. For example, we're seeing a lot of online marketplaces coming online, which offer smart and efficient devices or appliances. Other new pilots that are common are looking at the integration of energy efficiency with other distributed energy resources like demand response. We're also seeing that utilities are pursuing new technologies. So we saw a great increase in utilities that are targeting their energy efficiency towards high need areas, both in the residential and commercial areas. And we're also seeing some new approaches to targeting programs to make them more effective. I'll also mention that we did see a big uptake in electric vehicle programs. Here we've pointed out that 6 new utilities offered rates that utilities are offering to customers with electric vehicles to support off-peak charging. So I'll just end by saying we're very excited about the progress that we're seeing, but it is by no means universal. There were plenty of utilities that did not increase their savings and some that even reduced their savings. Overall, though, we do think that there's a lot more to be done, especially as utilities turn their attention towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We found that 37 of the utilities covered in this scorecard have adopted greenhouse gas reduction goals at varying levels of ambition. So many utilities are going to have to step up their efforts on efficiency to deliver on those goals in a cost-effective way. Also note that most of the innovation that we're seeing is at that program level. So while we're seeing innovation there, we also find that utility business models, which we evaluate as decoupling and performance incentives, are slow to change. And with those top 10 utilities in states that also have strong regulatory and state support for energy efficiency, we really still find that those policies are very important and that we should expect utility business models to need to keep up with the rate of change in order for utilities to deliver deep energy efficiency savings. We also have a number of additional resources that I'll just point you to along with the report. You'll find on the report page regional one-pagers that provide digestible information on what each region is doing well and where they could improve. We also have a data visualization tool, a public Tableau dashboard that allows users to play with the data and create their own graphics. And then, of course, we aim to be a resource for utilities and other stakeholders looking to improve their energy efficiency performance. So please feel free to reach out to us. Thanks again, and we're very excited about this, the report, and thank you for joining us. I'll be happy to take any questions at the end of the webinar.
Thank you, Grace. With that, before I introduce our next speaker, let me just remind folks, if you have any questions, to please go ahead and enter those into the chat box. We will do a moderated Q&A session later, and for now, go ahead and enter any questions that you have into the chat box. So next, let me introduce Greg Wickler, who's the Executive Director of the California Efficiency and Demand Management Council. He has over 30 years of experience in the energy industry and addressed a number of issues related to the demand-side resources, including energy efficiency, demand response, distributed generation, energy storage, and grid modernization programs for electric and gas industries. Over this time, Greg's directed a number of market potential and load forecasting studies, technology assessments, program design assessments, evaluation studies, and stakeholder collaboration and resolution. He has held a number of roles prior to serving as executive director at SEDMEC and other organizations. I will not list them all, but I'll just note that Greg brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise, and we are happy to have him here today to share his insights on the California perspective of our scorecard results. So with that, I will turn it over to Greg. Thank you again.
All right, thanks, Maggie, and good afternoon, good morning, folks. Glad to be here, and really excited to be speaking about this report that came out. Just a bit of background on as Maggie referred to us as SEDMEC. We like to refer to ourselves as the Efficiency Council. We're a statewide trade association of non-utility companies that provide energy efficiency, demand response, and data analytics products and services in California. Our member companies include implementation and evaluation experts, demand response providers, engineering and architectural firms, data analytic firms, contractors, financing experts, ESCOs, and even energy efficiency product developers and product providers. Much of our work involves legislative and regulatory advocacy to essentially ensure that we optimize the delivery and achievement of efficiency and demand management resources, which are really vital to the state for achieving its ambitious carbon reduction goals. So with that introduction, if you could move to the next slide, Grace, we could get into it. Just for overview, a lot of words here, and I apologize for that, but there's just a lot of content to get through fairly quickly. We continue to celebrate the wins that California has achieved in energy efficiency over more than 40 years of being at this effort. We're proud of the fact that we've transformed a lot of markets and products to essentially the baseline practice. Most recently, a lot of the lighting is really considered in the residential and non-residential spaces considered baseline. We've implemented some processes that that are intended to lead to market stability for the resource. So that most notably is the 10-year rolling portfolio process was established about 5 years ago now, and we've also passed a number of laws that really are aimed at combating carbon emissions through greater deployment of, among other resources, energy efficiency. So Assembly Bill 802, AB 802, and Senate Bill 350 or SB 350 are certainly cornerstones to that the policies that we put into place. And we're very excited about the report coming out with recognizing 3 of the top 10 are utilities in our state, and we're very excited about that outcome. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time just talking about some of the barriers that we are seeing in the market that is concerning to my membership, and certainly to a lot of folks in the state as we look to really our policies are aimed at increasing energy efficiency's role, and we're worried about the some of the issues and barriers that are getting in the way, actually showing some reversal of those achievements. A lot of it is related to regulation, some of the bureaucratic inertia that has really led to a sharp drop-off of what we're looking at, the potential. Certainly, there is the fact that a lot of measures and things have gone to baseline, but nonetheless, the energy efficiency market potentials are showing declines in the future, which is a great concern. And as a result, many of the utilities, not all, but many of the utilities that we focus on, and I should note that a lot of our work does focus on advocacy within the realm of regulated utilities under the California Public Utilities Commission. So these are investor-owned utilities. So 2 of our 3 utilities listed in the scorecard are part of that paradigm. But what they're doing right now is scaling back a lot of their existing energy efficiency programs for 2020, and delaying the contracting for new programs that are stipulated to be implemented by third parties. In fact, 60% of the resource is to be implemented by third-party entities within the next few years. Some of the utilities who still have the contracting obligations are imposing some onerous requirements on new solicitations, which is causing some concern. And what's happening is that a lot of implementers, a lot of my members are being forced to scale back their operations and lay off their staffs and relocate their businesses and their resources to other states. Next slide, please. Just wanted to very briefly just focus on some of the regulatory barriers that we've identified and we're working with our regulators and stakeholders to try to improve. Baseline measurements. Right now, the current law, AB 802, does stipulate that full savings for all existing buildings must be counted, yet most of the regulatory rules disallow existing condition situations. So we're really pushing to change that. I mentioned the potential study, that the market potential study is under identifying the resource, really predicated by methods and methodologies and assumptions that are mandated by the regulators that really need to be given a refreshed look. Inclusion of certain measures that are not included in the current potential studies really need to be looked at more closely. Cost effectiveness rules are a huge barrier in our state. In certain examples, like the applications of the total resource cost test, are not really adequately or correctly applying certain costs for incentives. The custom programs for large customers, which is a huge area of opportunity, is really in a state of near shutdown because of a lot of the regulatory oversight over the last 10 years has led to customers just not being able to participate, lost interest, they're frustrated, they're moving on. And I'll just mention that non-resource measures, these are measures that are considered non-resource but are ancillary to the programs, do yield savings, and yet they're not counted in the goals currently. Next slide, please. So I'll just mention also, I pointed out that we do have some challenges with regard to how we transition toward third-party contracting in our state, and what we're seeing, at least with some of the investor-owned utilities that are rolling out RFPs right now, is that there are requirements that are essentially non-starters for a lot of the existing providers in the industry. Things like performance assurances that are really required performance assurances that are based on regulatory constructs, and quarterly payments that make cash flow situations impossible for implementers. I know these are a lot of the details, but they are barriers. Another issue that we're finding is the expectation that energy efficiency has to be put on an equal level playing field with other distributed energy resources. And that in concept is a very good thing, but when it comes to contractual requirements, it's not appropriate to be putting energy efficiency in the same light and having the same contractual delivery expectations as, say, grid scale solar or battery storage, where those are resources that you can't necessarily contractually compare. So we go to the next slide. Just to conclude here, I just wanted to focus on what we're doing and some of the things that we're doing to try to overcome those barriers. Certainly it's a push with our regulators, and we're really trying to drive some reforms of the rules and the processes that have been put into place for many years now that are leading to some of these problems. We're working with the California Public Utilities Commission to help everybody really understand the root causes as to why we're in the situation and create an action plan for making some immediate fixes. We're also working to get many of the utility energy efficiency program termination decisions reversed, at least until new programs are fully launched later this year or by mid-2021. So with that, I'll just conclude, and happy to take some questions, and we'll hand it off to the next speaker then.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Before I introduce our next speaker, we're getting some questions about the slides. We will be sharing the slide deck with all webinar participants after we're done. So let me turn to introducing Stacey Paradis, who's the Executive Director of the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. MEEA is a member-based nonprofit organization advancing efficiency in the Midwest for sustainable economic development and environmental stewardship, and it's a leading organization in the Midwest, fostering market penetration of existing energy-efficient technologies, products, and best practices. Stacey has been with MEEA since 2008, and she has 25 years of experience in government relations, public affairs, and nonprofit management. Really appreciate, Stacey, you bringing your expertise and Midwest perspectives to our webinar today. So thank you, and let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, Maggie, and thanks.
Stacey, could you try again your phone?
Perspective. So if you can...
That's better. Thank you.
Oops. There we go. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Thank you.
Great. Sorry about that. Thank you for letting us provide the Midwest perspective. Thanks to Grace and to Maggie and to everyone at ACEEE. Obviously, we like to speak to what's happening and what used to be called the flyover country, and really the great advances that we're having in energy efficiency. So if you guys could jump to the next slide. So Maggie was good enough to give an overview, but this is who MEEA is. So as most of you know, we're a B2C organization. We have 160 members. We're a little different in that we have everyone is a member of ours that's involved in energy efficiency. So it's going to be utilities, investor-owned, municipal, and cooperative utilities, as well as research institutions, state and local governments, and then the full spectrum of energy-related businesses, from implementers to manufacturers and everyone else in between. Next slide. So we were really excited about the scorecard this year. Obviously, the Midwest has 12 different utilities, but they're representing 8 different states, which really kind of shows the breadth of efficiency as it's moved across the Midwest. We're thrilled to have 2 top 10 utilities, both ComEd at number 4 and then DTE at number 8. But what was also kind of exciting when I was reviewing a report is two of our states, Indiana and Missouri, which had utilities within them that were recognized, they don't have savings mandates. They have policies in place supporting energy efficiency, but they don't have that mandated savings target. But yet you're still seeing a really strong investment in energy efficiency, which I think is a really proud of how we've kind of moved in the Midwest. I did like this opportunity of what they highlighted in the report, 73% of points by our highest utility and 33% by our lowest, which again, as Maggie said earlier, or in Grace, we have opportunity to grow. The other thing I wanted to notice, in the Midwest overall, we've had substantial growth in energy efficiency over the last 10 years. 1.5 billion is on the electric energy efficiency side, and we have an additional, 324 million in natural gas. So we're just under that $2 billion mark of what's happening every year. And those are going to be utilities across the Midwest, not just the ones that are in the top 50 in the scorecard. Next slide, please. So again, I know you guys gave a little shout out before, but congratulations to Consumers Energy, the most improved overall. A lot of that was tied to some policy changes that I'll talk through in a minute. But that's really exciting to see. We like to see our friends throughout the Midwest recognized. Consumers is in Michigan. And really what's been exciting about Michigan is also how they've integrated energy efficiency into their resource plan and really seen a real jump in investment, both by Consumers and then DTE, which I believe is reflected in the top 10. And again, you see here for the under program offerings, DTE was number 1 with 92% of the total points, which is really exciting. And then to continue to spread across the Midwest, We Energies had the top spot for portfolio comprehensiveness. And then I was really excited to see, I think, Grace was exactly right. There's been a huge increase in focus in low-income programs. So we were really thrilled to see both Ameren, Illinois, and then DTE were the top scorers in that category. And then one thing I wanted to note, I know we've talked a little bit about EVs. EVs are still growing in the Midwest. We had 3 of our utilities, Consumers, DTE, and XL in Minnesota, that were in that top scoring category. But I would note that Evergy, for those of you that don't know, that's the new combined utility of KCP&L and Westar. They actually had the largest EV investment in the region. They're not in the scorecard, but I thought it'd be important to note that, and we do expect to see EV growth a lot in the next few years. Next slide. But as we all know, policies are what driving everything that's happening in the Midwest, either legislative or in the regulatory construct. So I wanted to highlight a couple of things. So in December 2016, two big things happened. In Michigan, they passed a revision to their energy waste reduction, is what they call energy efficiency up there, that really led to these huge growth in investments by both consumers and DTE. The biggest one that I think has been really beneficial is twofold. One is a tiered incentive mechanism tied to increasing savings over their mandated target. And then another, as I mentioned before, is integrating energy efficiency into their integrated resource plans. So we really have a strong bipartisan support for energy waste reduction, again, up in Michigan. And then in Illinois, you had ComEd coming in at number 4 here nationally, and you had Ameren at number 12, I believe. They're able, for the first time since legislation went through, to earn a return on their electric savings that they're able to generate. So that's why you've seen such an increase of investment here in Illinois as well. But I do want to note, Greg got to bring up some challenges. I want to bring up some too. Obviously, when we're talking about policies, we also have to make sure that we're always messaging them correctly. And we've had some challenges in the Midwest with legislative rollbacks in 2018 and 19 most recently. And those are going to really impact what those savings are going to be and what those investments are going to be in Iowa and Ohio going forward. In Iowa, they put some hard caps in place on any energy efficiency investment. It's had a huge reduction in their natural gas efficiency programs, but as well as on the electric side as well. That's impacting not just Mid-American, which is in this report, but Alliant Energy and then Black Hills Energy as well. In Ohio, we're still waiting. There's actually been, their EAPS has been eliminated. That happened in 2019. We're waiting to see reaction of the PUCO. The utilities there, at least Dayton Power and Light, Duke, Ohio, and then AEP, Ohio, want to pursue to continue to do voluntary programs, but we're going to have to wait to see if that's going to be allowed, that they get the cost recovery and things like that related to their investment. Next slide. I just wanted to share some charts with you. We'll go through these quickly. This is just giving you a basis by state of what the investment is across the Midwest. Obviously, we have folks on the high end and folks on the low end, but we really wanted to show that it is spreading out, and we are even working in the Plain states as well. Next slide. And this will just give you an overview of where the savings are. So obviously, you're seeing the biggest savings in Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, and Minnesota, but we still have strong actions happening in Indiana, Wisconsin, Missouri, and Iowa. Next slide, please. Then the last couple of things I wanted to share is what are our policy trends? What are the things that's going to drive energy efficiency going forward? As I noted, we're going to have an increasing divide between states that invest in energy efficiency and those who don't. Even if we don't put in portfolio standards that mandate savings in some of these states, if we can put in a regulatory construct that supports energy efficiency, provides those 3 legs of the stool, we will see investment. That's what's happened in Indiana. That's what's happened in Missouri. And I think we can see that going forward, hopefully, in some of our other states in the region. One of the biggest challenges for us, though, is industrial opt-outs. The industrial load in the Midwest, if you combine with electric and natural gas impact, is 35% of all the energy that we use. And unfortunately, with the political power of the industrials, they are not required to participate in the program. So we need to find a way to work with those folks, provide that utility connection so they can pursue savings. Everyone's been talking so far about the low income and multifamily focus. We're going to see that continue in the Midwest. And again, more of energy efficiency being integrated in the resource plans. We 100% agree with ACEEE. That's an essential way to go. As Greg noted, a lot of impact on the cost effectiveness tests. Some of those are mandated. We need to figure out in those states that have bad tests in there, how we can change those so we can really make sure that energy efficiency is on an even playing field. And so if you can go to the next slide, please. So I'll try to wrap here quickly. So where we are on program trends in the Midwest, we have a number of new governors that were reelected or were elected in 2018. We're starting to hear clean energy goals and priorities from them in Illinois, Minnesota, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Some of those are in lockstep, of course, with none of the utilities that are in those states. So that is something that we're really happy to see, and we're hoping it's a collaborative process working for, in most cases, Democratic governors' offices and Republican legislatures. There is talk about electrification. I know Maggie's going to ask some questions about this later, so I won't talk in too much detail about it. But I will note, again, in the Midwest, we have a preponderance of the use of natural gas. We also have very low climate zones, cold climates. So we need to make sure that we understand what the impact is going to be on any kind of talk of electrification, how that impacts our building stock, what the costs are associated with that, and how we're going to do it in large geographic areas. Again, a lot of opportunities with grid integrated buildings and market transformation. And I think we're still going to see a lot of talk about the opportunities that energy efficiency brings for workforce development and making sure that we have larger opportunities for diversity and inclusion with our underserved communities throughout the region. And that is all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stacey. That was a great overview of the Midwest perspective. And next, I will introduce Samantha Caputo, who's the Senior Policy and Research Analyst from the Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships, or NEAP. Samantha joined NEAP in 2016, supports a number of efforts at the organization, including building decarbonization, building energy rating and labeling. She helps advance efficiency by tracking and analyzing policy trends in the Northeast as well as the Mid-Atlantic, and provides technical assistance to state and local programs. Prior to joining NEAP, she was involved in grassroots campaigning on energy issues, and really look forward to having Samantha join us today. And thank you for being here, and we look forward to your insights from the Northeast perspective.
Great. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be a part of this webinar today and to see the unveiling of the 2020 Utility Energy Efficiency Scorecard. So again, thank you. I'm Samantha Caputo. I'm the Senior Policy and Research Analyst at NEAP. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that NEAP is one of the 6 regional energy efficiency organizations. We work with states from Maine all the way down to West Virginia and DC, and we're really working to advance building decarbonization by reducing building sector carbon emissions by 40% by 2030, and including reducing energy consumption 3% per year to help us achieve that. So super excited again to be here. If you go to the next slide, we'll dive right in. So as you can see here, we've had a lot of mention already that some of the Northeast utilities are in the top 10 ranking for the scorecard this year. And Massachusetts utilities, including Eversource and National Grid, ranking the top 2 spots, the second scorecard in a row, which is very exciting to see. You'll see here a graph with the first column being the energy savings that came out of the results of our programs in 2018, paired with the savings targets from 2018 to 2020. And while it's so exciting to see Massachusetts have such high level of savings achieved along with their goals, one thing I really wanted to draw an eye to is PG&E, Baltimore Gas and Electric, the third highest level of savings in our region. And I think this is really exciting because they achieved over 1% more than their target. So they achieved 147% of their 2018 target. And I think that's very important to highlight because Maryland does have an ambitious energy efficiency resource standard. So they have a goal of achieving 2% savings by 2020. And we can see here they're well on their way to that with lots of programs that are helping them achieve this. They have full revenue decoupling, and as well as lots of programs targeted towards low-income programs. So just to point to what's to come from Maryland and PG&E in particular, there's actually legislation currently introduced that would require at least 1% savings from the low-income sector per year starting in 2021. And that's significant because Maryland is currently going through their 2021 to 2023 three-year planning processes. So if that passes this session, they'll have a direct impact on that 3-year plan. And then we're also seeing some of our other utilities and some states that don't have, or haven't, I should say, had as clear of energy efficiency goals and targets in the past and programs implemented. So you'll see 2 New Jersey utilities there, the Public Service Electric and Gas over there towards the right end of the graph, as well as the Jersey Central Power and Light. So they do have savings achieved, but there were no mandated goals at the time of during the 2018 timeframe for these targets. But we are seeing savings starting to come out, and I think by the time the next scorecard for the utility programs comes out, and if the same utilities are included, we're going to see a change here, and that's partly because we had the Clean Energy Act that was passed back in 2018. It actually sets a 2% electric savings goals for the New Jersey utilities and a 0.75% gas savings target. So New Jersey is currently working through implementing that and setting out a plan for that through their energy master plan that just came out. And so the state is really evaluating how can we achieve those targets, what are best practices from other utilities that we can look to, which is a great use of this scorecard, is looking at some of the utilities that have higher energy savings achieved through previous programs. But I think that's one thing that we're going to see change significantly here, is those savings in New Jersey are also going to go up in the future. And then we also have Long Island Power Authority listed here, as well as National Grid in New York, both achieving over 1% of savings in 2018. But again, this is another state where we're going to see our utilities coming out with a really high level of savings in the future. And this is partly because a Public Service Commission order just recently came out in New York, authorizing a 2% savings target, which actually ramps up to 3% when you include the Long Island Power Authority and the New York Power Authority. The 2% is the investor-owned utilities being captured in that. Including those power authorities, it goes up to 3% through 2025, and then 1.3% savings target for our gas utilities in New York. And this is including efficiency and electrification programs, aligning with the new efficiency New York goal that Governor Cuomo came out with back in 2018. So again, we're seeing utilities and states responding to these targets and plans that are coming out of their states and working on setting higher achieving energy savings targets, recognizing that energy efficiency is a really big part to achieving larger climate goals. And I'll note too that Public Service Commission order that came out in New York actually calls out 2.71 trillion BTU savings goals for heat pumps alone. And so that's looking at cold climate air source heat pumps as well as ground source heat pumps. So we're really excited to see that electrification piece called out specifically with a target as a part of the energy savings goal. So if you go to the next slide, what does all this mean, and how does NEAP's work fit into it, and where are we trying to drive our utilities towards in the Northeast? And so building decarbonization is really our framework that we're setting our work in and really trying to drive our programs towards. So to really achieve our climate goals, we have to have advanced electric technologies, so those heat pumps are a big piece of that. Really deep energy efficiency, so driving our thermal efficiency, our weatherization programs to make sure our buildings are healthy and comfortable places to live, and then doing grid integration, so looking at our buildings as flexible assets to the grid and making that two-way response. So this is really where grid modernization comes in, as well as smart technology within our homes and buildings. And so this is really what we're trying to drive these programs towards. So if you go to the next slide, there are a lot of ways to help drive in that direction. So a few areas where we'd like to see programs go further. One is within the programs themselves, and so setting those all-fuel targets to capture electrification within utility program portfolios. We'd like to see more use of time-of-use pricing and incorporation of distributed energy resources to really fairly allocate those costs and allow for use of electrification and flexible loads. We'd also like to see more improved asset utilization, so looking at non-wires and not pipeline solutions within our portfolios where we're not having to go directly to those expensive transmission and distribution system upgrades. As we're bringing on new load through electrification, we need to make sure that we're not increasing that cost on the consumer and the ratepayer. So by being flexible, using non-wire solutions, we can help alleviate some of that. And then grid modernization, like I just mentioned, as well as looking at our cost effectiveness testing. So aligning state cost effectiveness and utility tests with these high-level policies that we're trying to achieve. That way we can help our programs evolve in those directions by incorporating and aligning the metrics used and the benefits and costs calculated within our tests so that they are speaking towards our broader policy goals, whether that's climate and carbon reduction, health, resiliency, comfort, whichever those additional policy goals are, that we're capturing it within the planning process within the utility sector. So that's really what we're trying to drive for, and I think we are going to see a lot of that coming out. In 2020, we have in the NEAP region, Rhode Island, Vermont, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New Hampshire going through planning processes for their next 3-year efficiency plans. In Pennsylvania, it's for the phase 4 of Act 129, which is their efficiency plan. So there's a lot of opportunity this year to help drive what we'll see in our next scorecard by really pushing for a lot of this these new metrics and these new programs within the next 3-year plans that we have in our region. So we're super excited about that opportunity and highlighting that opportunity for all the folks that are on the line to really help drive that forward. So on the next slide, just a quick highlight here, a lot of these topics and the future research areas that were highlighted within the utility scorecard. NEAP actually released our policy framework back in the fall, which really takes a deeper dive into a lot of these areas and highlights how we'll drive the region towards that and beyond the region as well. So I definitely recommend folks taking a look at this if you're interested. And with that, next slide is my thank you slide and contact information if you have any follow-up questions. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Maggie.
Thank you so much, Samantha. I really appreciate it. So we have some time left for questions. So I'd like to ask a couple of questions, folks, that our panelists ask you to please be brief in answering, and we'll get through as many as we can with the time that we have left. So a few of us have mentioned the important role that state policy plays in driving energy efficiency, and more specifically, efficiency has an important role to play in state clean energy plans, but we find it doesn't always get the attention that it deserves, as a resource to utilities specifically. So I'm curious if you could kind of summarize, and I know some of you have already touched on this a bit, but if you could summarize, what role does efficiency have in state clean energy plans now, and what's one particular thing that you think could be done to increase the role of energy efficiency as a utility resource towards meeting ambitious state clean energy goals? And let's do start in the Midwest. How about that?
No problem. No, absolutely. I 100% agree. One of the biggest challenges we're having here in the Midwest is as there are ideas of pursuing either a clean energy agenda or a 100% renewable energy agenda, where is energy efficiency in there? We are having challenges even from the advocate community that would rather pursue energy efficiency goals pursue renewable energy goals over energy efficiency. So there's a couple ways that you can address that. One of the biggest pieces of legislation that went through in 2016 was the Future Energy Jobs Act in Illinois. And note the word jobs in there. And I would remind everyone that, when it comes to energy efficiency, we are the largest job sector in the entire energy community, and we are about 2/3 of all the jobs in clean energy. So that is a story that we have to tell. And when you're in the political climate in the Midwest, we do need to talk to jobs because that's how we're able to get bipartisan support. We also have to understand the utility business model and what those rates of return need to be so that those Republican legislatures are going to be willing to pass kind of either new regulatory requirements or advance any of our portfolio standards. The other piece of it that's really important, I mentioned industrials before, but the other piece is buildings. And Samantha touched on this a little bit, but buildings, use 40% of all the electricity, and there is a big misunderstanding about, or a disconnect a little bit between energy efficiency and the buildings piece. We need to do a better job of integrating what those opportunities are in buildings and all those efficient measures, not only in new buildings, but existing buildings going forward. And that's something we're also pursuing in Illinois versus a new market transformation program to increase compliance with building energy codes, both for the residential and commercial side, that we're hopeful to get approved and run through our state-mandated stakeholder advisory group and start programs by the latter part of this year.
Thanks, Stacey. Greg or Samantha, would you guys like to jump in on this?
Yeah, this is Greg. I'll just briefly mention that, in our state, I mentioned this during my presentation, we have the policies in place. We have great policies in place that really include and put energy efficiency at the center. SB 350 is really the notable law that was passed in 2015 that really looks to double efficiency by 2030 in the state. And what we're finding, though, and kind of similar to what Stacey was mentioning in the Midwest, is that efficiency in the broader construct is not really in the conversation. And what we're trying to do is really push efficiency back into the conversations about distributed energy resources, about renewable portfolio standards, such that, especially in our state with, the urgency of wildfires and the need for grid resiliency, efficiency is really the most viable resource when we're talking about resiliency measures and islanding, using microgrids and things along those lines to help, improve the resiliency for consumers, for communities. So we're really trying to raise the profile of efficiency, at the same time overcome some of those barriers that I mentioned to really put efficiency in the proper and equal context to some of these other resources, such that it shows more appropriately comparatively.
Thanks, Greg. Samantha, anything to add?
Yeah, I would just add, too, that we're really trying to frame the discussion and pull it in as a clean energy or renewable energy with energy efficiency and strategic electrification, that these three strategies are what come together to decarbonize the buildings and our economy fully. So looking at it holistically and trying to break down those silos in between. And both Stacey and Greg highlighted a lot of ways to do that. So I'll just make that note there briefly, that we're really looking at it in that holistic approach.
Great. So let me ask a question about metrics and how metrics that we're using to measure energy savings. Traditionally, savings are measured in kilowatt hours. How is this, and I know in the Northeast, this is evolving. How are others approaching this? For example, states pursuing fuel neutral goals measured in BTUs and not just in site kilowatt hours. Any other perspectives on that evolution of energy metrics?
This is Samantha. I'm happy to kind of elaborate on what we're seeing in the Northeast. That works?
Sure.
So we're definitely seeing an interest in the all-fuel MMBTU metric, with Massachusetts and New York being two that have those two kinds of targets and goals implemented. But we're seeing a lot of conversation around whether or not that should be the sole metric and if it is the correct one. So we're seeing in Massachusetts having a megawatt target for active demand management to cover storage, as the state has a very specific storage goal. And then New York is capturing that MMBTU target for all fuel to incorporate electrification, but they're coupling it with the traditional goals as well, with megawatt hours and therms. But there's been states and utilities in the region that are interested in whether or not a greenhouse gas reduction target should be captured within utility programs, or if the MMBTU one really is the one that we should be looking towards. And do we move away from those traditional metrics, or do we need to couple them together? So I think we have two states that have gone ahead with pathways and other states that are looking to that, but also having a conversation. And NEAP has been involved in that conversation over the past year of trying to figure out if there is an approach that makes the most sense that we should try and standardize or not. But the conversation is definitely happening in the Northeast.
Yeah, and I'll jump in. This is Stacey. In the Midwest, it is. We're at the beginnings of the conversation. Obviously, we have prohibitions on fuel switching throughout the Midwest, so that's going to be the first thing that we have to address. The other piece, though, is how are we doing different measures? I will say this is a debate that's actually happening right now in Illinois. We now have the CEJA, which is the next iteration of FEJA, the Clean Energy Jobs Act, and that's going to be a part of it and really counting things in carbon. But it's going to be a process, and I think Maggie, you're 100% right. These things take time, and that's going to be something. These are going to be debated. I would think, at least in the Midwest, it's going to be multiple legislative cycles before we kind of see huge steps forward.
Yeah, I'll just add, in California, certainly all these issues are front and center. We have, as I said before, we have the policies, but a lot of the details with regard to electrification, decarbonization, looking at carbon is all in the kind of in the evolving stage. Just mention three things. We did have a major decision by the Utility Commission with regard to a longstanding test or a prohibition on fuel switching, much like what Stacey described in the Midwest. That the so-called three-pronged test was eliminated, and now we have a decarbonization test, which really does look at electrification much more on a equal basis or a appropriate basis with carbon emitting fuels. So that decarb test is just at the very beginning stages, being applied in some pilot programs in the state. We're talking a lot about a carbon metric and sort of switching from a kWh-based measurement to more of a carbon-based measurement. And in order to do that, we have to look at how to reform how we value the resources, because right now the valuation methods, the way that we measure cost effectiveness and the benefits of efficiency programs is really through one lens, which is a kWh lens. So getting our valuation metrics in order is something that is a high priority. There's open proceedings at the CPUC to address the valuation question specifically, and I dare say that I think we're starting to make a lot of progress and movement toward some substantial reforms and inclusion of different benefit streams. But it's early stages in California as well.
Thank you. I think that helped really bring out some of the ways that different regions are approaching electrification, which I did want to ask about. But Grace, could you also share specifically how the Utility Scorecard, this edition of the Utility Scorecard, tackled some electrification measures?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Maggie. The Utility Scorecard currently considers electrification in a fairly limited way, and that's something that we see as definitely playing a bigger role in future scorecards, and that we're excited about expanding in future editions. Currently, we look at electric vehicles, and so we look at how utilities are promoting electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We know that electric vehicles overall, while they do increase load, are overall more efficient than combustion engine or traditional gasoline vehicles. And so that's one way that we're seeing utilities promoting electrification in the scorecard now. And as I mentioned earlier too, we also look at whether they're promoting electric vehicle charging in a way that integrates them nicely into the grid and doesn't exacerbate issues of peak demand. And then also we do have a couple of things that look at beneficial building electrification. So right now, we look at whether utilities are offering energy efficient fuel switching programs. You can find that in the program diversity metric, the emerging programs metric. And those are programs that deliver overall BTU savings, greenhouse gas reductions, and customer cost savings. And we had 7 utilities that are running those energy efficient fuel switching programs. Unsurprisingly, most of them are in the Northeast, but we did have one program in Texas and one program in Washington. So sort of an interesting mix around there. But yeah, we're looking to expand electrification and see that playing a much larger role in future scorecards.
That's a nice segue into my last question. We only have a minute, so I ask that you each please just give me a very short, like 1-word or 2-word answer, and that's getting your crystal ball out and looking ahead, say 5 years. How do you think the scorecard needs to be different? What particular policy area or technology area or program do you think will need to be captured in 5 years that we're not fully capturing now? Let's start in the West. Greg.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think things will be very different in 5 years. We have 60% third-party implementation. So the utilities are not going to be doing the efficiency programs very much in the future. That's going to really significantly change the landscape. So I would look to, metrics-wise, what technologies, what innovations, what measurement methods, how we're, assessing savings, how we look at the market and the market in real time. Those are all going to be big issues that need to be measured and assessed and judged.
Thank you, Greg. Stacey?
Sure. Two things. One, we are hopeful that market transformation and really those long-term savings are really going to pick up here in the Midwest. That's something that we're just starting to work with, both on the electric and the natural gas side. The other thing is I think we're going to be talking more and more and more about buildings, and I think we're really going to focus on those deep retrofit programs and what those decarbonization strategies are to really generate those savings over the long term.
Samantha?
Great, and just to close that out, I'll say definitely carbon. You need to be capturing that, and then looking at grid interactive buildings as well will be important to echo what Stacey just said.
Thank you so much, and I'll give the final word to Grace.
Thanks, Maggie. Yeah, I think when I think about the future scorecard editions, what I'm excited about seeing develop is how we can incorporate efficiency into planning better. So thinking about valuing efficiency's time value, its locational value, and thinking about how we incorporate that into distribution system and overall resource planning for utilities.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for participating. Again, we'll be sharing the slides in a follow-up email. And all right, thank you so much. This concludes the webinar, and we appreciate your participation. Thanks to all of our speakers and Grace for leading the report. And we will sign off now. Thank you.